Deep in the dense Appalachian wilderness stood the charred remains of a once thriving village called Ashbourne. Years ago, a fire swept through the town in a single night, leaving nothing but ashes and bones. Stories lingered about what caused the blaze, but none could be proven. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of darker forces. Over time, the forest reclaimed the land, and Ashbourne faded into obscurity, remembered only in hushed campfire tales. Clara Walsh had heard the legends growing up. Now a budding journalist, she decided to investigate the forgotten tragedy for an expose. Her editor dismissed it as a fool's errand, but Clara was undeterred. There was something about Ashbourne that felt personal, as if the town's ghosts had been calling her name for years. Armed with a notebook, a camera, and a backpack of supplies, Clara ventured into the woods alone. The hike was grueling, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Clara finally arrived at the ruins. The village was a skeletal husk. Blackened timbers jutted from the ground like broken ribs, and scorched stones marked where homes had once stood. Despite the destruction, there was an eerie stillness to the place, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. Clara set up her small tent near the remains of what appeared to be the town square. A moss-covered fountain stood at its center, its stone cherub frozen mid-laugh, now grotesque in its weathered state. As she unpacked, she noticed the silence. No birds, no insects, just an oppressive quiet that pressed against her ears. The only sound was the crunch of ash beneath her boots. That night, Clara combed through old newspaper clippings and handwritten notes she had collected about Ashbourne. The fire had occurred in 1887, consuming the village in a matter of hours. Survivors were few, and their accounts varied wildly. Some spoke of a sudden, unexplainable inferno. Others claimed to have seen shadowy figures dancing in the flames. One survivor, a young girl named Margaret, was said to have raved about voices calling from the fire, begging her to join them. She disappeared weeks later, her body never found. As Clara read, the wind picked up, rustling the fabric of her tent. She brushed it off as a normal forest sound, but it soon became more distinct, a faint whisper, like the murmurs of a distant conversation. Clara froze, straining to hear. The voices seemed to weave together, too soft to understand, but undeniably there. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside, the cold air biting at her skin. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the silence returned, even heavier than before. Clara's flashlight beam swept over the ruins, catching nothing but shadows. But then, in the corner of her eye, she saw movement. She turned quickly, aiming the light at the fountain. Nothing, just the warped cherub staring back at her. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Returning to her tent, Clara locked the flap and tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. But sleep didn't come easily. Throughout the night, she heard faint laughter, distant sobs, and the occasional rustle of ash. When dawn finally broke, she stepped outside to find strange markings etched into the soot around her tent. Spirals, circles, and symbols she couldn't decipher surrounded her campsite. They hadn't been there before. Determined to uncover the truth, Clara spent the day exploring the ruins. She discovered remnants of a church, its steeple collapsed, and a schoolhouse reduced to little more than a foundation. Inside the church, she found a rusted iron box buried beneath a layer of ash. Forcing it open, She uncovered brittle pages from a journal, the handwriting spidery and uneven. The entries were chilling. They came at dusk, their eyes like embers. They whispered promises of salvation, but their words burned my ears. The fire was their gift, they said, a cleansing, but it was no gift, it was a curse. Margaret hears them now. She says they're beautiful. I see only death in their flames. Clara's hands shook as she read. The entries grew increasingly incoherent, the writer's fear bleeding through the words. She took photos of the pages before placing them back in the box, a sense of unease gnawing at her. As night fell again, Clara prepared herself for another unsettling evening. She built a fire to stave off the cold and the darkness, but it did little to calm her nerves. The whispers returned, louder this time, and seemed to come from all directions. She tried to record them, but her equipment picked up only static. Then, the shadows moved. Clara saw them out of the corner of her eye, figures that flickered like flames, darting between the ruins. She called out again, but this time, she received a response. A voice, clear and melodic, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." Clara's blood ran cold. She turned to face the voice but saw no one. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice cracking. The only answer was laughter, light and childlike, echoing through the ruins. Panicking, Clara grabbed her flashlight and began to back away toward her tent. But the shadows closed in, forming shapes that resembled people. Men, women, children. Their faces warped and indistinct. Their eyes glowed like embers, just as the journal had described. "Why have you come?" another voice asked, this one deeper, more resonant. I wanted to learn what happened here." Clara stammered. "We burned," the voice said, almost amused. "And now we burn forever." The figures surged forward, their whispers growing into a deafening roar. Clara turned and ran, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the village. Looking back, she saw the ruins ablaze, the fire illuminating the ghostly figures within. They danced in the flames, their laughter ringing out like a chorus of bells. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat in the woods, trembling and clutching her notebook like a talisman. At dawn, she made her way back to civilization, vowing never to return. When she developed the photos from her camera, she found one she hadn't taken. It showed her standing in the ruins, surrounded by shadowy figures with ember-like eyes. In the corner of the frame, the cherub from the fountain was smiling.